Welcome, everyone. I'm Amy Seeley, president of Seeley Test Pros and LEAP, helping students to succeed in all kinds of tests from 8th grade to grad school throughout Ohio.
And I'm Mike Bergen, president of Chariot Learning, helping students with the test school and life based out of Rochester, New York.
Between the two of us today, we have over 60 years of experience at the highest levels of the test preparation and supplemental education industries.
We both love to talk and learn about the latest issues in education, testing, and admissions. So let's get down to tests and the rest. The fascinating topic we want to explore today is the impact of divorce on college admissions and financial aid. But first, let's meet our special guest, Vicki Vollweiler.
Vicki Vollweiler is the founder of College Financial Prep and an expert in divorce and college planning strategy. She helps parents, especially separated, divorced, and blended families, navigate financial aid, build financially smart college lists, and avoid costly mistakes. With a warm, practical approach, Vicki's mission is to reduce stress, increase clarity, and help families to save as much as possible on the cost of college. Vicki is the author of College Planning for Divorced and Widowed Parents, Reduce Stress, Save Thousands, and Make Smart Decisions for Your Child's Future. Welcome.
Thank you. So glad to be here today.
Vicki, we are glad you're with us. This topic we're going to tackle is one that we really like. This is relevant for a lot of people.
And it's one that we've never tackled, Mike, so it's finally about time, is what I would say.
It is about time. Before we dive into that, Vicki, we'd love to hear about your background and how you came to be a specialist in this specific aspect of college admissions.
I'll try to make it the short story. So everybody knows, I went to Syracuse University for my MBA. I went on a full free merit scholarship ride to go there. They gave me a stipend also to pay for it. So that was wonderful. And then I went out into the real world. I was a VP of client services. I was negotiating economics between clients and vendors. And then I got divorced. And I decided, okay, I wanted, since I was switching up my life, let's switch career paths too. I decided to become a divorce coach. And I was certified doing that. And what I learned about myself at the time is that I wanted to focus on people's finances, not the emotional side necessarily of divorce. And with people's finances, you get divorced, you spend all this money on attorneys, you're living life as a single parent now, as opposed to as part of a couple. Expenses are much greater. And people were starting to ask me now, besides their personal finances and saving money, how are they going to pay for their child's college education? What could they do to save money? And, at the same time, my own kids were starting to get older and thinking like, wow, this is really important. This isn't like telling somebody to stop going out for coffee every day.
No, cut that avocado toast out and you can afford a college education.
Right. So, with lots and lots of research, and I remember saying like, I don't know how anybody would figure this out on their own, just so people understand. I come from a family of attorneys and accountants, so I kind of have that mindset. Saving money on college definitely became my focus.
It's interesting because you said, you kind of moved away from the emotional part of managing divorce to the financial, but really the finances inflame emotion, right?
Exactly. So, there are, therapists and, psychologists, coaches out there that help to reduce the emotional stress. And I help people with their finances to, in turn, reduce the emotional stress.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense.
And it's also interesting, too, because in divorce, very often, you're talking in this particular case about adult children, which are not covered. Once the child is over 18, it's a gray area of who is assuming any financial obligation. And so even if you get divorced when the kids are younger and you didn't even think about that or negotiate it, you're kind of in some new territory, because it's kind of like it's not clear who's really responsible or who's willing to be able to put forth that financial contribution.
So it depends on the state that the parents live in. Some states do mandate that colleges in the divorce agreements. Some states do not. And I work with parents who are high conflict. I work with parents who are amicable. Sometimes I'm just working with one parent because it's not mandated in that state and they refuse to get on board and help. So depending on the situation and, the finances and who is participating, is how I'm going to help the, quote unquote family, and the student to get the best education, but, also at the best price.
So it may go without saying, but can you kind of clarify for us, why is college planning actually more complicated after divorce?
Um, Typically married couple, they make the goals together. Okay, this is what we hope for our child. These are the schools. Let's point them in this direction. Let's try to keep it to this type of budget. Now you have two people. Maybe they're newly divorced. Maybe they've been divorced for 15 years. They've gone on to lead separate lives, certainly separate finances. What one parent might be willing to do could be completely separate from the other parent. One parent can be thinking, I only want a private school education for my child. I'm making this up. This parent, they may have gone to a private school. They want the same for their child. The other parent can be thinking, no, in-state community college. That's what, that's what I did. That's what my child should do. And it causes all this conflict. So, it's the emotions, it's the different finances. It could even partially be the child. What if they want to go for a certain major and one parent is against that major? So conflict arises there as well.
Yeah, so potentially in non-divorce situations, it's sort of two parties, the child and the parental unit. Whereas post-divorce, it's sort of potentially three camps, if you will.
I feel like a lot of times two parents can conflict in terms of their hopes or fears for their children, even if they're married.
Yes, that's true. But you don't have the same level of animosity.
Just because of the fact that there's already
ongoing conflict.
Yeah, exactly. A conflict. And so then that it turns out that even reasonable discussions can become charged.
Exactly.
And it's hard to find a middle ground where there's agreement.
One thing that I always suggest is that when it's time for the topic of college to come up, and I always recommend it come up sooner rather than later because there needs to be a lot of lead time, is certainly send everything in an email. Try not to do it, as a conversation, but to reread those emails and make sure there is no tone of voice. Nothing should be misinterpreted. It just needs to be straight conversation to try to get on board. And ideally, it's going to be the student and both parents that can ultimately have the same goals and work towards a common goal when college planning. That's the hope.
That makes a lot of sense. So what mistakes do divorced parents make during this process while students are still in high school that can lead to issues down the road?
I think a big mistake is parents leaving it till 12th grade and deciding and seeing ultimately where the child wants to go to college. And I'll explain. So a lot of saving money on the cost of college will start with the college list. And kids are developing that college list in 11th grade. They're even starting to visit schools in 10th and 11th grade and thinking about, different programs, majors. With developing the college list, it's much easier to pick schools that may only look at one household instead of both households financially. See which schools might be more financially friendly, as opposed to letting the child alone drive the list. And then they don't hear back till March of senior year how much each of those schools are going to cost. So May 1st is college decision day. There's not enough time to realistically negotiate this with a former spouse as to what college their child will go to, unless it's the least possible, the least expensive alternative if they applied to an in-state or, a community college.
So it's funny, you're mentioning this idea of different colleges might treat students differently, like what their policies might be for divorce. So I'm wondering, how can colleges, or how can you find out if a college might look at you differently, in a divorce situation?
So there are two main financial aid applications. There is the FAFSA, and then there's what's called the CSS profile. FAFSA will typically look at one household. Now, if a parent is remarried, it is also going to consider the step parent, even if the step parent is not contributing a dime to the cost of the child's education, but a step parent also has to be reported on FAFSA. So, this is another reason that I suggest parents start in 11th grade to determine how best to go about FAFSA. It used to be the custodial parent was the one who filled out FAFSA. That is not the case anymore. Now it is the parent who provides the most financial support for the student. So I'll sit with clients and independently, but we'll go through who is providing what for the child to determine which parent it should be in terms of completing the FAFSA. Then in addition, there's also the CSS profile. The schools that require the CSS profile, most of the schools, not every school, but most of the schools will want both parents' information. So for instance, I had a student who was applying to schools that needed the CSS profile. Both parents were remarried. We had to submit 4 parents worth of income and assets for the one student.
Yeah, so this just really creates a terrible situation for students because, when a household splits, even in the most amicable of situations, they are, you might have instead of a 2-parent household, you have 2 single-parent households with added expenses, and yet they're accountable for a similar contribution in the eyes of the college. It gets harder when you add step parents, and it gets harder, I can imagine, when at least one of the parties doesn't want anything to do with college contributions. They're still, I can imagine in a lot of cases, divorce happens because one parent simply is not taking responsibility and
a lot of divorce
happens.
A lot of divorce happens just because of disagreement over finances. Right. And now you're putting this huge financial concern between the parents, and disagreement happens.
What if a parent refuses to take part in this process, meaning that you're talking about applications that require contributions, disclosure of information from both parents, but what if one parent disappears or just I'm not going to do it?
So it depends on the school. With schools that require the CSS profile, there is a CSS profile waiver. However, people think, we could just fill it out since, the other parent won't, cooperate. No, it's not that simple. You have to prove that there's zero communication with that other parent. You need documentation from whether it's the high school, therapists, religious clergy, some outside.
It's actually like a history of that parent almost being like an absent parent in this.
You can't just say that they're absent.
Is that documentation difficult to acquire? And also, is that documentation easily duped?
It's easy to acquire if it's all truthful.
I mean, there's plenty of examples of, say, physicians writing fraudulent prescriptions. Is it possible? I'm thinking of the shenanigans that some people play trying to get financial aid. I know personally growing up, and I know things changed, but I know at least one family that separated long enough for college. That doesn't happen a lot in your experience.
I'll tell you the truth. There was something that a situation I encountered the other day, and I wrote on it, as long as none of this is fraudulent.
Good. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Right.
I mean, that's you being ethical. Okay. But a person who is in that scenario could turn to a school counselor or someone else who can share this information that one parent is not involved in a way that schools that accept the CSS profile.
And presumably that particular person writing it has witnessed, they've experienced with the student.
Like, they want something from either the high school.
They can die. And I would imagine in terms of professionals, like school professionals, or, that they're going to take that responsibility of, documentation pretty seriously, right? To be able to say that. But I think essentially what you're saying, if I go back, is we know there's the CSS profile that some schools use. That's the document that's more complicated because in divorce and remarriage, it starts to include a whole cast of characters in the documentation. Let's go back to the FAFSA. But the FAFSA, you're saying, that is where I could imagine there could be more questionable behavior, meaning, yes, there might be, like you said, it's not the custodial parent, it's who pays the most. Well, I could imagine a situation where both parties say, which of us make less money? And let that person be the person with, air quotes here, who is paying for more than half, because that's something that would be far more difficult to really be accountable for.
So this change occurred 2024 with the FAFSA.
With the better FAFSA.
With the FAFSA Simplification Act. Yeah. All I can suggest is that people have documentation to support how they arrived at that answer, should a college, wish to verify it.
But presumably, I have a daughter who's in college and I'm divorced, and I know that we both essentially do pay 50%, like everything that comes through for college, or, for her, rent, food, 50%, 50%. In that particular situation, if it's pretty much 50-50, because we literally split every bill, that could be a situation where it could be to one's advantage to say, give it to this person rather than the other person, right?
No, maybe I'm misinterpreting what you're saying, but when somebody applies for financial aid, I'm making this up. The bill is $60,000. Oh, they're going to give you financial aid of $10,000. Mm-hmm. So now your bill is 50, and both of you splitting it would be 25 and 25, as opposed to each of you being 30 and 30.
Right. You know what I mean? Right. But what I'm saying to you is, if the person who fills out the FAFSA is presumably the party who is paying for more for that student.
Right.
What if literally the two parties are always splitting all of these expenses 50-50?
Oh, you mean not included? You mean
no, I'm talking about the whole kit and caboodle, all of it. Every bill is 50-50.
Where does the child primarily live? Who's paying more in mortgage? Who's paying more in for transportation?
So you can really get into the fine details of the residence they live in and things. Okay, I understand that, but gotcha.
So it doesn't go necessarily by who is paying child support. It doesn't go by necessarily where the child resides, but taking all of the factors into account. Yeah, it's possible to determine who should be the one filling out FAFSA.
But FAFSA is a less, the determining factor there, it does not involve as many parties as the CSS profile is, because the CSS is just going to be more invasive for families in situations of divorce or remarriage.
Yes, but still it can include a step parent on FAFSA, depending on which biological or adoptive parent is completing the form.
Yeah. Well, my sister, who's divorced and not remarried, they've stalled any remarriage. It's after her youngest is past it.
And Vicki, you're shaking your head. You're saying this is probably
the financial implications are getting remarried to someone who potentially makes more money is very problematic.
Yeah.
True story. A client, I work with clients, through the college years, helping them with their applications. And I reach out and say, oh, are you ready for us to get together? And he's like, no, I'm getting married in 2 weeks. And I'm like, no, then we need to do it right now. And he's like, I don't have time. Sorry. I'm like, okay, this is the implication.
Right. And it's something that some people consider, but some people have no idea what that ramification of a remarriage is going to be.
Right.
So one way, I suppose, Vicki, for divorced parents to save money on the cost of college is to avoid getting remarried until all the paperwork is filed, ideally for 4 to 6 years.
Until the youngest child is done.
But that's the reality we live in now.
Because that's a really good one. Are there any other strategies that can save families significant money?
There's lots of things. We could talk about, and this is not divorce specific, but merit scholarships, honors programs, there are ways to go after money. And this is all part of the college, putting together the right college list. When I'm working with families or clients, one parent and student, we're going to be looking at, what financial aid might they qualify for from the government? What financial aid might they qualify for from the schools? But also, where might they get merit scholarship money too, because that certainly plays into the picture. And the student does not need to be a 4.0 student or have a 1600 on the SATs. Maybe it's because they're the leading French horn player and a school needs them for the band. Maybe it's because they come from a certain region of the country and they're looking at schools in a different part of the region of the country and they want to, entice them to come over. Maybe a school has a brand new major and the student is interested in that major. There are all different reasons that schools offer students merit money. It's out there. The family has to be willing to consider those options. The more flexible the student and the parents are in terms of choosing which college, the more opportunities there'll be.
Makes perfect sense. And of course, right, you've got to shop around. You've got to look for your best opportunity. Amy and I deal with students all the time pursuing merit scholarship. Test scores and grades matter a lot.
Definitely.
Let's loop back around to where we started in talking about the emotional aspects of divorce and how they impact everything. Do you have thoughts about how parents can navigate co-parent communication when the college planning process becomes contentious or has in its background other interpersonal conflicts?
So, I'll tell you some true stuff that I do with clients. Usually one of the parents is the one reaching out to me and they're all concerned. They're already fighting. And honestly, I say, ideally, I don't want to speak to the one parent. If possible, I want to get both parents together without the child. The child does not need to be part of the financial conversation unless the child is privy to everything. But I want to be with both of them because if I'm just with one of them, then they're going to be playing a game of telephone and the other parent is not going to believe what the first parent says that I told them. I want both of them here so that way they can each ask me questions together. I'll ask people for financial information beforehand. I tell them everything I'm asking is completely confidential. I am not sharing anything with one parent or the other. I give them my cell phone number during sessions so that way if they want something to stay private but want me to know this information or ask me a question, they can do so privately. But I want their information so I can guide the whole family as best as possible during the session, and they hear it all directly from me.
What I hear you saying is that when these conversations become contentious, it's really important to have a mediator.
Yes. I'm not. Yes, I act as a mediator. I'm that third party neutral. However, I do a lot of training of the mediators. Mm-hmm. Mediators don't always know about the college planning piece.
Of course. I think I'm looking more big picture to say that these conversations that
it's easier with the third party.
Countless families are having around the country every year. How many millions of students go to college every year? And then what percentage of their parents are divorced?
Are divorced, right? Mm-hmm.
You're probably too busy to speak to all of them personally, Vicki. But I think that they probably all need to get some ideally trained professionals to help them navigate these issues.
Oh, definitely. And especially when one parent has one idea and the other parent has another idea, and getting them on board to working together, and also, how to do it so that the child is comfortable and least stressed throughout the process.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. Vicki, conversation like this, we could talk about for hours. Unfortunately, we are out of time. But thank you so much for joining us.
You're very, very welcome. So glad to be here.
If listeners would like to get in touch with you, what's the best way for them to do that?
They can reach out to me at www.collegefinancialprep.com. You can click on the blue button, schedule a free call. Also look for the tab about divorce and college planning. You'll find my book. You'll find our book club, and other information is there.
Awesome. We hope you enjoyed this discussion as much as we did. Be sure to join us for another fascinating topic and guest on the next Tests and the Rest.
Did you enjoy this episode as much as we did? Find expanded links and more for this and all of our episodes at our show page at testsandtherest.com. While you're there, be sure to explore everything the larger TestBright site has to offer including real, expert, unbiased answers to the toughest admissions testing questions. Of course, we'd love for you to rate, review, and subscribe to Test and the Rest on your favorite podcast platform. If there's a topic or guest you'd like us to feature, just let us know and spread the word.